Welcome to this special interview with Dr. Joe Tafour and Martha Hartney of the Church of the Eagle and the Condor. My name is Stuart Preston. I'm the host of the Consciousness Podcast, and I am honored that the church has asked me to conduct this interview with Joe and Martha. Dr. Joe Tafour is a founding board member and ayahuasquero of the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, and Martha Hartney is a managing attorney for the church. Here, they discuss the church's history, its purpose, and the legal battles around getting religious status for the sacrament. Please enjoy this conversation with Joe and Martha. It's really an honor to spend some time with you and learn more about the amazing things that the two of you have going with the Church of the Eagle and the Condor and some other things. So why don't we start, if you guys don't mind, give us a quick background on what the church is and what you guys are doing, and then I'd like to maybe talk about your personal stories of work with medicines, and then we can get into some of the real meat of what's going on with the church today. But maybe a real quick background on the Church of the Eagle and the Condor and what that's all about.
Yeah, okay. Well, maybe I'll start a little bit. So yeah, we're part of the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, and the Church of the Eagle and the Condor is a spiritual community and a church, based in Arizona. It's a multicultural a mix of different people, including people coming from Navajo or Diné, background, including in the leadership. We have Belinda Aracho is one of the board members of the church. The other board member of the church is our friend Rodney Garcia, who is an anesthesiologist. He's Cuban American, but he's somebody that studied deeply in this Peruvian tradition. It's called Pachacuti Mesa. And then myself, Joe Tafour is another board member, studied in Peru with the Shipibo tradition. And so we are this coming together of people and this coming together of communities that are in our, belief, we're kind of this fulfillment of this eagle and the condor prophecy. It's this kind of ancient prophecy from South America that in this time that we're living in right now, 2021, that this would be, according to their astrology, after a long period of 500 years from the 1490s to the 1990s, of a lot of trouble and discord between, let's say, the European cultures that came and colonized the Americas, and then the native people of the Americas, and the very kind of sad and tragic story, that many of us are aware of how oppressive that has been. But then that in this time right now, that there would be this, according to the prophecy, there would be this ecological crisis, that would call for like a big shift in consciousness. And there'd be this desire to shift in consciousness to try to deal with the issue of sustainability and the issue of disconnection from Mother Earth, from the Earth itself. And so that there would be, from the eagle side, from like the North American side or the European side, a lot of different ways to kind of explore the metaphor, that they would be kind of looking for answers outside of their culture, that their culture perhaps would become overly materialistic, overly individualistic, overly scientific, overly intellectual, maybe like heading into toxic masculinity, for example, and detachment from spirit, that people from those cultures would be suffering all this alienation, be having a hard time and looking for answers outside of their culture. And then there would be the native cultures, this Condor path, Native American culture, where they, recovering from this, the genocide and the tragedy of the, so many things that they've suffered, and the resentment over that, and still grieving their losses, and very reluctant to share like elements of their culture, of their sacred like knowledge and teachings. But in seeing the situation of the world, realizing that maybe this is the time to reopen that connection and this kind of path of heart. So then you got this path of mind looking for more heart, and this path of heart, ready to open back again to the mind. And so that's this coming together. And so then there's all these different versions of that, where Native American spirituality has started to become more open and shared. One of the examples of that is ayahuasca practice, like from, for example, the Shipibo culture where I trained, that that spiritual practice of doing ayahuasca for sacred ceremony and spiritual healing, that they would begin to share that, with people from United States, from Europe, as has been happening over the last 20, 30 years. And then that eventually that those practices would make their way, back up north into the United States, which is, part of what we're doing. So we're part of that fulfillment of that prophecy of the kind of the reflorescence, of this Native American spirituality, which is not restricted to ayahuasca ceremony. I mean, we have these Pachacuti Mesa traditions and just ritual and prayer and Diné, Navajo traditions of song and chant and dance. And, we have all the Vision Quest, the Sweat Lodge, all these different practices that are all about like helping reactivate, spirituality in our culture, reactivate reconnection to the land and to the nature, reactivate, sustainability, reactivate spirituality and all the benefits that brings to so many people, including, their mental health, et cetera, et cetera. So we're about that. That's the Church of the Eagle and the Condor. And so among our practices, I'm the ayahuasquero. We use ayahuasca in sacred ceremony. And there's issues around legality in the United States about that. There's 2 churches that have already gotten exemption from the DEA to use under religious freedom to be able to use ayahuasca, although it's a Schedule 1 substance. According to the DEA, they're allowed to use it for religious purposes. And so then for me that, learned in this tradition in Peru where it's legal, where it's recognized as the spiritual heritage of the land, of the people,
right,
come home here to the United States and feel like, this is the spirituality I want to carry. This is the spirituality I want to share. And so we formed this church to promote all the other parts of the Eagle and the Condor prophecy, but also to help protect, our sacred right to utilize ayahuasca.
right.
And now we're starting a legal process, to try to see how do we get legal, how do we get legitimate in the eyes of the United States authorities. And so we have our GoFundMe, and we have our team of lawyers as we raise money to go through a legal process that it turns out costs money.
Yeah.
And so we're asking people to help us. So that's a little bit of who we are from my end. I don't know if Martha has something she'd like to add.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I should add to the the legal aspect or the personal story and my understanding of the church, because
Yeah, and I'd like to hear
I'm
both your
not
personal
just
stories. Yeah, as to also what kind of, we're talking about plant medicines and ayahuasca and other things. What, I'd like to hear from each of you kind of what your personal story, your personal connection is to this and why it's important to you.
Maybe Martha, go
Do you want me to pick it up there or let?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, I'll go ahead a little bit. Well, what Josie, you were talking about the Church of the Eagle and the Condor. It reminded me about why I came to this church myself, first as a member and then as a lawyer. In that, my own journey to the medicine was very late in life. I came to the medicine in my late 40s. I was 47 years old before I ever tried any type of, quote unquote, and I don't like this word, drug.
Yeah.
Before that, I was like completely a no to everything. And I just say, no, mom, I had 2 kids and I came to a place in my life where I had really lost faith in the world. I just lost faith in everything. And somebody suggested, why don't you try a plant medicine? Here's this one called ayahuasca, and they described it to me, and I was like, nah, that can't work for me. And besides, I don't do drugs.
Right.
I don't do that. And then I finally got to a place where I was absolutely bereft and lost. And I gave in, and I said, all right, I got to ask for I need a miracle, really. I need a spiritual miracle to heal my heart. And I came to the medicine, in a church setting, in a religious setting, and began a path of healing that brought me to the doors of the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, where what they were up to in fulfillment of the prophecy, the healing of the head and the heart and the body, spoke volumes to me. And it felt to me like this is the right place. This is the place where people are healing. They're doing good spiritual work. They are trying to mend the rift between the Western mind and Western mindset and the heart, where the Native Americans and the indigenous peoples of both South and North America have been holding on to this heart wisdom, waiting to give it back to the people who have shunned it and set it aside and said it doesn't matter, but it does matter, to have both our head and our heart in alignment and online and functioning to be a good whole human being. And so I'm all in with the mission and message of this particular church. And, we've been trying for a couple of years to be prepared to bring a petition to the DEA, to our government, and to win the right to use ayahuasca as its principal sacrament, not only sacrament, but principal. And we realized we were getting shut out. The government was not going to play ball, and they were finding every possible way to close the door on any further churches winning this right for their membership. So that's why, we got into an agreement with Chacruna to raise some money to actually, go to town, to bring a case and to try to open the door a little bit wider for bona fide, good religious use. Since ayahuasca has become such a, explosive medicine in the United States, we wanted to also show what's a good way of bringing this medicine forward, of holding ceremony, of doing good work, of being there for people, of really helping them through their process. So, I just have been so blessed by the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, and Joe and Belinda and Rodney, and the way they bring their medicine, that I really committed myself to this.
Wonderful. Yeah. And so what the church, you've mentioned the religious and spiritual aspect of it. How does the church work with its members and with the medicines? And, Joe, you mentioned even a sweat lodge. How bringing all this together, somebody who is out there listening to this interview, obviously, we want them to get involved and to support the cause, with your legal fight. But if they're out there listening to this and thinking that they need the same kind of help Martha just described, what kind of things would they experience with you guys at the church?
So, we're a small community, and we are we are expanding our practices, but we're not proselytizing, we're not out trying to tell everybody to come join and do what we do, but we're trying to share, with those people that come into alignment with what we're doing, and so for our community and our members, so, one of the things that we'd like to be doing more of is when we deem, fit, is to share ayahuasca ceremony with people. So that's one of the things. But the other thing that kind of built our community was when we started as a gathering as a group was through just community meetings. The first community meetings were through the Modern Spirit community, which was just about being in Arizona. You're here, Stuart, and, maybe feeling sometimes there wasn't enough of the progressive element, or there wasn't a venue for people to talk about their spirituality and their spiritual path along the lines of their community interests. In other words, somebody has our friend, had a community garden, and she's looking for people who want to volunteer and help and be part of that. But where does she meet those people?
Right.
Because, before, in maybe more traditional American society, well, that would happen in the church, in church, you go and you meet people from all walks of life. That's one place where you go meet, my dad's a doctor, but then we get to meet the plumber, and this other person's this, and you get to help each other, at that level. So it's it was about building community. So for us, first of all, it was about building community, and there are different versions of that and things. So then that, part of our membership at that time was Belinda and Naomi. And then also we were guided to some degree by Daryl, Navajo medicine man, wellness mentor. And so then they were offering sweat lodge, so they're offering sweat lodge and the full moon. So part of our thing is about reconnecting to natural cycles. And that's really healthy for people spiritually. And so then reconnecting to natural cycles. So there's every full moon or new moon, there's a sweat lodge, Then another practice that was a traditional practice that Belinda started spearheading is there's different versions of this. So I don't want to get it wrong because there's Navajo tradition involved, but it's a form of talking circle. So that, and when we say medicine, in our tradition, and then I'm saying from the Native American spirituality, and this is an important topic because this is an area where the DEA or the government, tries to push back and says, oh, you guys are calling this a medicine. You guys are saying you're getting healing, you're getting therapy. So then that's you need to go to the FDA. and go through clinical trials because you're talking about medicine. But for us, like in the tradition, and it has always been the case in the Americas and in many other cultures, but here for sure, medicine refers to, in this case, sacred medicine. So that's why like the Native American spiritual elder or, slash healer in many cases is called the medicine person, the medicine man, the medicine woman. And the medicine that they share can be, song. It can be prayer. It can be dance. It can be sweat lodge. It can be talking circle. So like evolving the technology through the tradition around a talking circle of how is it that you get people together in a group to talk through their issues and support each other, and have like these kind of ancient principles to guide that process. So talking circle is another, event. Other events that we're doing is like service events. So going to, for example, like that we're friends with the people over at the Peyote Church. So going to a work day with the Peyote Church, or a work day at another friend who has a retreat center, and all of us going and pitching in and helping them out. We also went, for example, to offer prayer at Oak Flat, where there's a, the Apache people, one of their sacred sites is Oak Flat, and which is within a kind of a, I guess it's a national forest or park campground. And that's being, it's at risk of being destroyed through mining. So then we went over to go offer prayers and reach out to those people and communicate with those people and support those people. So those are the kind of things we're doing on top of supporting what our membership is doing. So there's a lot of members that are starting, educational programs through the internet or community programs through like, we've done events at K, our friends Daryl and Pam, who have a kind of a community center in Mesa. So we do events there. So these are the different things that we've been doing and that we do. We've built sweat lodges, within the community for members of ours who are now starting to run their own sweat lodge. So that's what we've been doing, and that's what we're a part of so far, And so we're evolving, and that's the beauty of it. But that's what we do.
Yeah, great. And Joe, I think your story is available in one of your books, but do you want to share real quick what the medicines mean to you, the sacraments, and why they're important to your life?
Yeah. And so this is, and as we get back into the same old of like medicine talk, why I'm a doctor. My dad was a psychiatrist. My dad actually studied in the seminary in Colombia as an adolescent, like was considering to becoming a priest. And so in Colombia, you don't see it every day here, but in his generation, it was not like that uncommon. And there was a great hope among the parents that maybe one of my kids is going to be a priest or a nun. Like that existed in their generation. And so if somebody was to pursue that, and in this case, my dad, went through that process, like until I think he was like 18 or 19, he was studying in the seminary. And then he decided that to help people the way he wanted to help people, that the world had changed. People weren't going to the priest anymore to work through the issues that were facing them at the level of their soul. Like how do they deal with the loss of a loved one? How do you deal with whatever depression over changes in life and shifts in life? How do you overcome, terrible vices and addictions? And how do you overcome trauma from your life? How do you learn how to forgive yourself and others? Like those are things that you learn traditionally, like in the church,
right?
Through spiritual practice and the teachings of the scriptures, and going to, in his case, Catholic Mass. Learning about how to work through that stuff. And then he realized that in his life, to be able to reach people at that level, at the soul level, at the spiritual level, he was going to have a lot more opportunity if he became a doctor and if he became a psychiatrist. So my dad did that, and he came to America to do that kind of work, but he was always coming from that spiritual background. And so then for me, oddly enough, then when I go to medical school and under kind of his guidance a little bit, and it had been coming from what I felt like was a very spiritually kind of rich life and felt real connected in many ways. And then when I ran into the culture of like the Western medicine, which for somebody like him, it was like, well, Joe, this is a great opportunity. You're going to be able to help more people. This is the way, And then, but for me, it was like, whoa, it became this land and this world where where spirit wasn't allowed.
Mm-hmm.
And where I really like, that's what made me suffer. So then
Mm.
that disconnection from like community, from nature, from spirituality, is what like kind of pushed me into a depression.
Mm.
And it was something that I hadn't really experienced up to that point in my life. Maybe little moments, but nothing like that, really
Right.
trapped in my head and really like not able to appreciate, what was going on around me. Just every day feels the same as soon as you wake up in the morning. And you're just like, what's the point,
Mm-hmm.
in this kind of life where, what Martha's talking about, when you feel disconnected from hope,
Right.
disconnected from faith, like what is that, you know is that like, if we open ourselves to a metaphysical discussion, like there's something there, there's
Mm-hmm.
something when people feel connected, when they feel inspired, you know when their faith is a tangible feeling, that they actually feel connected to what's going on. And so I like felt very disconnected, like so many people do. And then that, how that looks from maybe through a medical lens is what some people would call soul sickness. You know,
Mm.
that's like when I grew up in the 80s, I felt like that was in the movies. People would talk about that term, like, oh, you're soul sick, you know.
Mm. Yeah.
I was like, that right? It was around like
Yeah.
spiritually ill or soul sick is like something normal. You see a sad dog, that lost its buddy,
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody can understand what that is. But then through the modern medical lens, this kind of overly, where we lose that side, becomes just purely materialistic, and it's neurons and neurotransmitters and networks. It's like, oh, you're depressed, you know, you're
Mm-hmm.
depressed. And so then, yeah, that's what I was depressed. That's the way you would describe it. That's the way you talk about it. And so I'm depressed, looking for help. And then I tried different things, and then, eventually come to my dad with it. And my dad's like, well, why don't you try this antidepressant, because
Mm-hmm.
actually your mom had a hard time one time, and this one helped her, and your brain is kind of like hers, and it'll probably help,
Right.
And so then I was like, you know what? Yeah, I'll try it. And so I tried it, and it did help me kind of get out of my head and appreciate things, but I wasn't quite, like sure that that was the solution for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I'm like, okay, I want something else. I want something more natural. And then eventually I've had an opportunity to come back to Arizona. I was studying in San Diego and go to the Peyote Way, Church of God,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and go through peyote ceremony, sacred plant medicine ceremony, spiritual plant medicine ceremony. And I had a humongous like experience that just reopened me to all this connection that I was looking for.
Mm.
And so the sacred plant medicine just like just helped me like shut off my internal dialogue, reopen myself to my heart, and then find all the things that are connected on the other side of me reconnecting to my heart, you know,
Yeah.
hope, love, faith, a place in the universe.
Yeah.
And so then that was like so revolutionary for me that I was like, I can't believe no one's talking about this, you know? How come I just found this out now? And then my family's from Colombia, and so I knew they have the ayahuasca tradition, yahe tradition there,
Mm-hmm.
that is regarded as a ancient spiritual tradition, legal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew about the ayahuasca scene in Peru, and I went down there to see, like, because I was like, if we can do this with peyote, and I started meeting ceremonial leaders from that community and seeing how they operate, this like evolution of being so-called like the medicine person, somebody that would help guide people through spiritual processes, through ceremony. And I felt this familiarity with that. Like
Mm.
they would start asking, hey Joe, could you help us with this, or you help us? And I'm like, well, I kind of feel like I belong here,
Mm.
you know? And so then
Mm-hmm.
I went down to Peru to go try it. And I had huge experiences connecting with ayahuasca and the ceremony and the tradition, and was just blown away by their ability and skill to kind of deal with those spaces and places, and deal with metaphysical energies, and to try to support people and help people in that way that when it was time for me to leave that place, I couldn't stop crying.
Mm.
I was crying. I don't cry that easily, and
Right.
I could not stop crying for a couple hours.
Mm.
And it was just all about me feeling like I found something that I felt at home with. Not just ayahuasca, but the whole way that they're approaching people and working with people, and that would be like that. Maybe I have a gift for that,
Yeah. A
to help
connection.
people, a connection, and to help people like that. And I was being recognized for that by the people who are in that. And so then I started going back, and more experiences, more. The book I describe a lot of the experiences that I kind of kept me going back, and then eventually got involved, and then eventually started working with people in that capacity in the ceremony, and helping people with ayahuasca ceremony and the traditional plant medicine diets and the rest of the Shipibo kind of like context. And
Mm-hmm.
then to kind of realize, oh my God, like to feel like you have this, like maybe we don't, the word, people don't like the word, or what's the right word, shaman, or, curandero, medicine person. Like, what if I'm born for this?
Right.
What if this is like, and what if I'm good at it too? Like
Yeah.
what if this feels like a blessing in my life and a blessing in the lives of the people that I'm able to share it with, So then you come home to USA after putting in all that time, and where it was just a beautiful thing to be a part of. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
known thing, like Niwerao, Centro Espiritual, and what we did and how we help people, and Ricardo Maringo and my teacher and all the Shipibos, they guided all of that process. And from them, from a very like sacred place, from a very like traditional, like I say, in their culture, this psychedelic plant medicine, ayahuasca, is not a counterculture. It's the most conservative thing in their culture. This is what your grandma tells you to do.
Yeah.
This
So
is what
different.
we do with the little kids, you know,
Yeah.
present. And so I come home, and then they tell me it's illegal, you're a
Mm-hmm.
criminal for this. And so
Yeah,
that's
which is so
my
dissonant. That just
struggle.
doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So that's my struggle. And so that's why we're like out here asking for help. And that's it's a sad part of my story, to come home and want to share with my family, with my mom, with my that, hey, look what I have learned. Look how I can help. Look how I help people come closer to the spirit.
Mm.
And then they say, oh, then your mom has to be worried that, oh, they're gonna take you away,
Right.
you know, for
Yeah, that's such that's another disconnection after that beautiful experience and that reconnection with kind of your purpose in life and with all these other beautiful human beings, and to come back here and have the door slammed shut again.
Yeah. And then, and I'll hand it over again here in a moment, but then to say, okay, well, what does it look like? What does this path look like to try to become legal? Because we have the example of the peyote, religious freedom, and then now these two Brazilian churches. So then that was like 2013 was the first time that I went to a meeting with a bunch of people to talk about the legal issues.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're like 8 years later, and it's like
Yeah.
nothing's really changed. The government has not really made the pathway any more open or any more clear. So that's the struggle for us.
And it sounds like from doing a little bit of research on you guys, it sounds like the government's tactic is almost like rope-a-dope, is to just climb inside of a shell and let you guys keep trying without really giving you much of any response.
I mean, there's definitely, I mean, it makes sense what you're saying. It's like to sit back and we'll see if we, unfortunately, and there's other possibilities. There's hope that there's new movements within the
Mm-hmm.
DA, that with all the psychedelic research and all the other movements and legalization of marijuana, that there's another momentum, where
Yeah.
people within the DA would rather not be going after somebody like me. you know
Right.
they have a lot of other things to do, and I say it all the time. It's like, here's some really brave individuals who are trying to make a difference, and but then they're forced to follow orders because of the nature of their job. And it's like, well, it would be nice to give them the priorities that they could feel strongly about.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Just a comment, I told you guys before, my dad was DEA, ironically.
Which is amazing.
And yeah, and I would, he would tell me stories, and I remember being at a football game and some guys, had some marijuana, and all he does is pull out his badge and show it to them, and I was like, so you don't arrest these guys? And he's like, no. He says that's not what we're about. That's we're not after people doing little recreational things or people doing spiritual things. It's we're after the guys bringing kilos and kilos of cocaine into the country. So there is some kind of, even though those guys can think very black and white,
Yeah.
like
Well, they have their discretion, and we respect that, and we respect all these guys doing what they're trying, like we're saying. But unfortunately, then there's some point at which they may have to follow the letter of the law, and it's not always them, or maybe it's in our case the Customs and Border Patrol, right?
Oh, right.
So we're trying to figure out, okay, we want to practice this, but we don't even know, there's no real legal pathway for us to receive ayahuasca from South America, like from where I learned from, from the teachers that I work with. And so I had a shipment sent to me, to my name. I decided to do that, to come out in the open with it. Because it's like, I feel like the momentum's changing. All right, here's me, I'm Joe. And when we can't figure out how to do this, so many people are interested in trying to make this available, but there's no pathway. So let's send it to my name and see what happens. And they seized it, they seized it. And so then that's how we started this process with Chacruna, was to start this Freedom of Information Act process with our lawyers, with Martha and our other lawyers, to try to say, okay, what happened? Like, they received it and they said, this is DMT, this is illegal. So what did they do with it? They told me, they sent me a slip that said, okay, we're going to follow up with you. We believe you received contraband. We're going to follow up with you. But then was there really a process? Was there really a chance for us to tell them, hey, this is our sacred plant medicine?
Right.
And so that's what we're doing right now, is just trying to get the details of what happened to our shipment, what happened to, turns out, many, many other people's shipments. We were getting reports through Chacruna that since the COVID, for whatever reason, maybe Customs and Border Patrol has more time on their hands, or like, you're saying there's this discretion, or maybe at some point they say, well, let's not worry about that. But then in some new moment, 2020, we got reports through Chacruna that maybe like 80 people were saying, hey, they took our ayahuasca. So then we also were investigating that, what happened to all these people's ayahuasca, so we can try to understand what is the government's position, and what are our hopes for trying to become legitimate, especially like when Martha says, like, the DEA application process. It is right now looking like a rope-a-dope, because in one of the examples that we have is the group that was asked to apply, SoulQuest, that applied, over like 3 years ago. They applied, and then they don't get an answer back for 3 years from the DEA. And so then they feel like they're in a limbo of like, okay, we exposed ourselves. We told everybody this is who we are and this is what we're doing, in the hopes of negotiating a process. We applied. We're asking for the exemption. And then they didn't reply until they were sued. They had to be sued to say, hey, process our paperwork. And then that lawsuit happened. And then it was court extension after court extension after court extension. And in the hopes of like that they were going to find a settlement. And then they didn't, So for somebody like us, a small church, it's like we look at that process of like, look at the expenditure of paying lawyers to go through that whole, years of process just to say no. It's tough, it's tough to see how we can operate.
Yeah, it really is. So they seized up to 80 of these shipments of ayahuasca. What's the status of those?
Well, Martha can handle questions.
Yeah, I'll field that one. First thing is that I just wanted to comment on the SoulQuest case and how kind of egregious that has been for SoulQuest, for whatever anybody might think of SoulQuest and the work that they do there. The process that the government basically lured them into, and said, you have to petition for this exemption, for which we don't actually even have any authority to grant you such an exemption under our own statutes, and then drag them into a court process, force their hand, and then pretend to negotiate, not actually negotiate, and then deny them. It's basically a trap. I would almost call that entrapment.
It is. It's trapping them into inaction.
Yeah, and the question that remains is how and under what circumstances would the DEA agree to grant an exemption? And frankly, I just don't think that they will. I think it's got to be a court that requires the DEA to give an exemption. And that's
Mm-hmm.
the only way that it's happened in the past. The two churches, the UDV and Daime, have those exemptions not from any petitioning process that they went through in good faith, but by suing the government.
Mm.
And so I think that's unfortunately may be our only actual path towards getting the Church of the Eagle and the Condor some exemption from the government. And then back to your other question about the current status of the Foia request that we sent to the Customs and DEA. We know a lot more now than we did a couple months ago, and none of it's good news. Unfortunately, it is still a runaround because even in these agencies, it doesn't appear like the rank and file know a whole heck of a lot about what they're handling and what they're doing. I don't think any of them recognize that there is a religious exemption for ayahuasca. There certainly is no process for anyone who's importing ayahuasca to get consideration, or special consideration. They just treat it like a Schedule One controlled substance, like everything else, and they
Mm-hmm.
dump it in the incinerator.
Mm.
So if they find, yeah, it's all been destroyed. It's
That
not
doesn't sound like
there.
due process.
It's not due process, but in the regulations that they operate by, they are
Yeah.
permitted to destroy Schedule One and Schedule Two controlled substances summarily. They don't need to give notice. They just destroy it because and to them there is no legitimate use. There is no
Mm-hmm.
exemption at all. So now we have, what we have is the customs saying, okay, well, you got to go get some licenses from the DEA and get all these permits to import. Then we'll talk to you. So we're back at playing ball with the DEA, anyways. And what we
It
do
always
know
circles around to
is,
the DEA and then they just punt.
yeah, yeah, and they're just, they just get you in a box canyon and shoot you down.
Right.
So it's not a fair process by any means. And it is going to force anybody who really wants to vindicate their religious rights to go to court for it. So, we're trying to figure out what is our next right move to
And
do this in good faith.
and there still remains the hope that perhaps there's a negotiation process available with the DEA, or that, in other words, they're saying, like as Martha's indicated, it's like, well, they're following their standard procedures, like you're saying, Stuart, like if this was 20 kilos of cocaine, like they can destroy it without telling anybody,
Mm-hmm.
they'll tell you afterwards. So that's kind of, they're operating under that policy because they treat it like it's that kind of substance. And so, we've found it, okay, there's all this other research and there's all this other thinking and there's all these other examples of other countries where it's regarded as a, sacrament. And even within this country, it's regarded as a sacrament too. For example, the UDV and the Santo Daime. And so that's what I said, at the last conference we had with Chacruna. It's like, well, we feel that we are at least as sincere as those groups.
Mm-hmm.
We're just as careful, and we respect, all the concerns around safety and tracking the substance and being responsible for it as they are. So then we are within the precedent, technically speaking, like I guess we'd have to go through a court process to really prove that. But we believe that we are, and there's evidence that we are.
Mm-hmm.
So so then we have to go through that whole process, of like, risking this stuff, all these things you're talking about, all these little high risk maneuvers, whether that's rope a dope or getting entrapped or, all these different things just to get to these places that already exist. And then furthermore, like we're further limited because if we don't have the money to pay lawyers to take us through
Mm-hmm.
that process, so then we're just stuck. So that's this issue of like feeling overly burdened, in our religious rights, that we feel like
Yeah.
we're overly burdened. And so then there's the possibility, like maybe, there, like Martha can tell us more about this, but there's supposed to be this rulemaking process since 2006 when UDV went to the Supreme Court, and the DA is supposed to like create, or somebody, they're supposed to create some rules to kind of like, okay, if we're going to allow this religious exemption, what is the process, and really lay some stuff down there instead
Right.
of being this loose kind of thing without really any real direction, or there's minimal direction from the prior court cases, where now SoulQuest is going into this process with the DEA where it's kind of open-ended. It's like we don't really know what they're going to require from us or what they're going to ask. We're just going to make it up again and find out if they disagree, at the end of the whole process. And so it's like, okay, there's this rulemaking process that needs to happen. And then there's this possibility of like this community involvement in such a rulemaking process. So would the DEA or some agency of the government be open to talking to groups, that want to come up with better solutions for this problem, And so that's another avenue that we're supportive of, and we look forward to, and we'd prefer not to sue. But again, it's like, how long is that going to take? And when is that going to happen? And what do we do in the meantime?
Yeah.
That.
And anybody out there? There's a lot of underground groups out there. There's you guys who are going the church route, the legitimate church route. I don't want to make it sound like an end around. This is a legitimate thing. SoulQuest has their thing. Has anybody been arrested?
Martha can.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes, as a matter of fact, there have been 5 arrests pursuant to the seizures at the border through customs.
Wow.
So, so there's at least 80, more like maybe 90 or 100 seizures since 2020, since the pandemic began.
Mm-hmm.
And we know of 5 arrests. How those were decided to be followed up on by local law enforcement is unknown. It probably has something to do with a suspicion of a person actually dealing medicines or drugs, having multiple medicines or large quantities. We don't really know, but it's probably something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And people have been, 5 people have been arrested. One person followed up on his seizure with a lawyer, and good thing he sent his lawyer because they would have arrested him right there on the spot. But there's one in Florida, one in Washington, one in New York, and Arizona, and Texas. So we don't know exactly what's going to go on with those cases. I sure hope that each of those people, if they really have a sincere claim of a religious right, that they have a good lawyer who knows the Religious Freedoms Restoration Act and the First Amendment.
Yeah.
But we'll keep an eye on that. So, it's not a done deal just because someone is using ayahuasca religiously that they'll be safe. It really depends on a lot of other factors. So I just, word of caution to people. Be
Right.
careful.
Don't just slap the word church on your circle and hope it's going to protect you.
Yeah. Right. It doesn't necessarily work that way. It really has to be sincere. So the First Amendment and RFRA doesn't protect just any claim of religious use. It has to be real. It has to be grounded in something concrete and identifiable and understandable by a layperson.
Is there going to have to be some kind of a civil rights type of act of defiance followed by an arrest and somebody pushing this all the way through the court system in order for them to take some action? Or is there anything we can do to kind of make these procedures take place?
Well, there's a couple things. One is there are some lawyers out there who are starting to formulate the idea of a uniform plant and fungal medicine act federally to just try to draft something up that would be understandable by legislators, the federal legislators. We do know that there are some people in the administration and in the legislature now who have been helped by plant medicines, or their families have been helped by plant medicines. So it's not like a complete tabula rasa in our own government. So I think there's a certain amount of lobbying that could be done, and information dissemination to our own government, and to help them understand what these spiritual medicines are all about. There's a softening, I think, at that level, maybe more so at the federal level even than at the state level, because I think state level law enforcement are the ones who are really tasked with enforcement at this point. The DEA is not intending and has not made any arrests around ayahuasca, and I don't believe that they're intending to. But if they do see something that looks egregious, they're going to bust it down to a state level for sure. So I think there a time is coming where there's a cognitive opening of sorts where people realize that not all plants are drugs, not all medicines are bad for us. So we'll see what happens in the next few years. But I think, all the work that the Thank You Plant Medicine community is doing to destigmatize plant medicine use is helpful. Anything that we can do to maybe be courageous and kind of come out of the closet and tell our story is going to help everybody.
Well,
yeah, absolutely.
Just to jump in here, so then that's where where we're coming in right now is that, like I said, having sat through these meetings and different things since 2013, and just seeing the kind of the slowness of everything, and just realizing, okay, well, what if we come out? What if we come out in the open? But our hope is that what we're going to do, compared to what some of the other groups have done in the past, maybe we would hopefully to do it more, is to be more open and transparent about our process and help other people learn about the process, of how, if they want to do it too, or how they go about it. So that's the crowd fund, we're saying, okay, well, if you all help us, fund this project and fund our lawyers, we're going to tell you how we did it, And so our website's going up, and we've been sharing our documents. Like for me to come up with the documents that we needed to incorporate as a church, and all the different things that we thought we would need to be prepared to face the DEA if we got into trouble. There wasn't a lot of sharing. Everybody's paying their lawyers secretly, doing this stuff. And we're hoping to see all that stuff, come out in the open, so people can help support each other. And so that's our goal is to put our necks out there, for everybody. But we ask for that support from everyone while we go forward with the hopes of trying to help everyone. That's what we're trying to do. And so for us, it's easier because, our spiritual context is this broad spiritual context of the eagle and the condor. And it's about helping, everybody reconnect to, like we're saying, to spirituality. And that's one of our practices is the ayahuasca ceremony to do that. But we're really the foundation of who we are is about helping people, this spiritual healing that gets, construed as medicine and something that, therapy, or they try to use it as a reason to not allow it to go forward. But what we're talking about as healing in the traditional sense, in the Native American sense, is about aligning yourself with your divine path, about helping people come into, as we say, right relationship with themselves, with their loved ones, with their intimate, family, with their community, with their society, with their ecosystem, and with the universe. That's what we are about, and that's what we're promoting. So we feel like our goals are very universal, and so that's why we're asking for help, because we want to help all those causes, and help make it easier for people who really want to use these sacraments in a sincere way, to have a path available to them, and to take the heat off, like you said, these, DE agents and people who'd rather not be pursuing this stuff, that they have other fish to fry. And so why do we, can we get through some of this bureaucracy to really try to clear up a lot of the confusion and a lot of the corruption that has come along with the so-called war on drugs, really trying to get to the heart of the matter of improving our society, helping our society, taking care of the children, how doing the best things that we can do for people's families, for our community, for our society, really setting our priorities clearer, instead of following through on some, perhaps misguided policies that are not bringing the kind of results that the society needs.
Yeah, that's a very profound mission that you guys are on, not only for your church and your members, but for greater society and even humanity in general.
Yes.
So somebody listening to this and is inspired by this, what could they do to help your cause?
Well, they can go to right now there's GoFundMe.com, the charity GoFundMe.com. We have the campaign, which is it's the Church of the Eagle and the Condor Ayahuasca Religious Freedom Initiative. You can find out more about it on chacruna.net, or you can find out eventually we're going to have our website up. We're still almost there, but chacruna.net is promoting at this point
Nice.
Religious Freedom Initiative and the GoFundMe campaign. So they can go there, they'll learn more about it. There's other information there from us, and they can donate, to try to help us meet our goals.
Wonderful. Wonderful. What else do you guys want to get out there before we wrap up? Is there anything that I didn't ask you or anything that's on top of your mind that you want to get out there for everybody?
What about you, Martha? Can you think of anything?
Yeah, something was occurring to me, and I'll just try to keep it really brief. I'm an attorney by day, and in my practice as an estate planner, I see a lot of people who are broken, and they're broken in spiritual ways. It would be, one of my greatest dreams is to, reconnect to spirit, reconnect to our own lineages, so that we don't feel quite so separated from one another and from the earth. And the path of the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, and trying to, make that, to sew that back together, weave that back together, to me is why I get up every day and do this. And have been doing it for about 3 years now. So I'm so grateful to the Church of the Eagle and the Condor for their, it's sort of a meta message. It's not just one pathway. It's weaving together multiple pathways of the people who existed here before, when we got here, and separated ourselves from our own lineages and our own land and took over someone else's. So I'm really grateful that we have an opportunity to heal some of these immense fractures in our psyches, and our bodies.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm grateful that there's an estate attorney out there that understands the issues of end of life and death and the spiritual connections. It's not just something that people need to fight over money. So that's
it's all that, and for us, like, we respect all the spiritual traditions. My family, like I said, my family has deep kind of Catholic roots, and here in America, where there's a lot of Judeo-Christian influence, and then all the other influences, like, we respect all of that. We're saying that in whatever our spiritual practice is, that we should be able to start, like, moving towards some more universal goals. And those universal goals is, like, we can kind of learn about what kind of progress we're making when we have a more holistic kind of perspective. It's like, are you well? Like, is this, is your spiritual practice helping you find, like, wellness mentally, emotionally, physically, is helping you overcome, the difficulties of your life. And so, and every tradition and every practice that does that, we support that, and we're all about that. And we feel like, there's a lot that was set aside from the Native American spirituality here in this land and this continent, that we could do a lot to bring that back in, to try to help make our society healthier again, and then everyone else's and all their different spiritual practices, and our ecosystem healthier again, for the future of all the generations. So it's about that, it's about, like, holistic wellness and mind, body, spirit, and, like, the depth of spirituality. And, like, you were talking about with Martha, like, what are we doing here in this life? That, okay, we're going to die and you got to figure out what to do with your money, but what else?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, anybody listening out there, please go to chacruna.net and GoFundMe and help these guys out, because they're doing amazing work here. I really honor you two, Joe and Martha, for everything that you're doing with the church, the community, and humanity. I'm just grateful to have spent time here with you guys today, and thank you for everything that you two are doing.
Thank you very much, Stuart.
Thank you. And to Belinda and Rodney, too, who are spearheading the church. I'm just here supporting. So thank you to the entire Church of the Eagle and the Condor and the board of directors.
Absolutely.
Martha and our lawyers that are working hard, on this process and doing what they can to help us out.
Yeah. Good team effort.
Yep. Thank you, Stuart.
Yes.
Thank you, Stuart.
And that concludes our interview. Thank you for listening.